You are welcome to the second week of this course, Edu721 Psychology of Learning. In lesson 1, we discuss the concept of psychology, and we discuss some of the scientific methods of investigation in psychology. We also discuss the concept of learning and its attributes. We also looked at the importance of psychology of learning for the teacher. We are about to start another interesting lesson, which is theories of learning and their educational implications. Psychologists have tried to explain how people learn and why they learn. They have conducted several experiments, and on the basis of these experiments, they developed many principles and theories of learning, explaining why people learn and why and how they learn. We are going to be discussing all of this. So sit back and enjoy the lesson. Yeah, like I said, we are discussing the topic of theories of learning and their educational implications. And we are looking at two of those theories of learning, which are Pavlov's theory of classical conditioning and Skinner's theory of operant conditioning. But first of all, let's understand what learning theories are. Let's understand the learning outcomes of this lesson. After completing the lessons of this topic 2, you'll be able to define learning theories, classify the two major groups of learning theories, describe the basic concepts and principles of classical conditioning theory, describe the basic concepts and principles of operant conditioning theory. You will also be able to explain the educational implications of classical conditioning and that of operant conditioning theory. But first things first, let's understand what learning theories are. A theory is a scientific explanation of how learning takes place. Several theories have evolved about how people learn. And in a broad sense, there are two groups. In a broad sense, the theories of learning are classified into two major groups: the behaviorist theories and the cognitive field theories. The behaviorist theories focus only on external observable behaviors. And they believe that learning is the connection between stimulus and response. And that is why they are also called stimulus response theories, or SR theories. The key proponents of these theories, that is of the behaviorist theories, include Pavlov, Thorndike, Skinner, and Bandura. Each of them have also developed their own type of theory that they propounded. For instance, Pavlov developed the theory of classical conditioning. Skinner developed the theory of operant conditioning. Thorndike developed the theory of connectionism. And Bandura developed the social learning theory. These four proponents, or these four individuals, belong to the group of behaviorist theories. Then the second major group of learning theories include the cognitive theories. For this group of theories, they pay more attention to what goes on in the learner's mind and focus on mental processes rather than observable behaviors. And the type of learning that they conceptualize is known as insight learning. We're going to be looking at all of this. But first of all, for this lesson, we are focusing on Pavlov's theory of classical conditioning and Skinner's theory of operant conditioning. Pavlov's theory of classical conditioning. Pavlov, or Ivan Pavlov, was a Russian psychologist who propounded this theory. Let me just give you a background. Before I go into detail, let me give you a background about this theory. In classical conditioning, a person or animal learns to associate a neutral stimulus with an unconditioned stimulus that naturally produces an unconditioned response. As a result of this association, the previously neutral stimulus comes to elicit the same response and thus becomes a conditioned stimulus capable of eliciting a conditioned response by itself. For now, please don't be confused. I'm just building a background. Yeah, that sentence is just a background. Later on, you will come to understand better how this theory works, how the classical conditioning process works. And I would also like you to note these abbreviations that have been indicated in bracket in that opening definition. Like NS. NS is a neutral stimulus. What is NS? I've been able to explain the meaning here. Just note down the meaning. They are very important in understanding Pavlov's theory of classical conditioning. These are concepts that are relevant to the understanding of this theory. NS, UCS, UCR, CS, and CR. Take your time to understand the meaning of these abbreviations in relation to this theory, so we don't waste time on this slide. Okay, so let's go on. So Pavlov's theory, we are still talking about Pavlov. When Pavlov, how did he come about this? How did he conceptualize this theory? He presented Pavlov as a psychologist, is a researcher, and I'm trying to explain what motivated him to carry out this study. He noticed that whenever he has a lot of dogs that he uses for his studies, for his research. He was a physiologist, first of all, before he became a psychologist. So he used to use dogs in his experiments. So one day he noticed that whenever he's approaching to feed the dog with food, the dog will start salivating. So he became curious and then decided to conduct this particular experiment that gave rise to the theory of classical conditioning. He took one of the dogs, he presented food to the dog, and the dog salivated. He noted that he recorded that. And then he took a bell, he just rang the bell to see if the sound of that bell could trigger the salivation response in the dog. And he noticed that the ringing of the bell did not trigger the salivation response in the dog. The dog did not salivate. He also noted that. Then Pavlov proceeded to ring the bell and then present the food. The first one was he presented the food and the dog salivated, which is natural. It's a natural occurrence. It's a natural response. It's a reflex action. It's just like you step your foot on a nail or bottle and you feel hot. So that feeling of pain, that feeling pain is a natural response to the pain on the leg, to matching your leg on the bottle. So in the same way, the food presented to the dog triggered the salivation response. It's a natural occurrence. There is no big deal about it. It is natural. Ordinarily, that will occur. So for number 2, the ringing of the bell, the sound of the bell, did not trigger salivation in the dog. We also noted that. So in the third instance, he rang the bell, presented the food, and the dog salivated. So what he tried to do is to associate the ringing of the bell with the presentation of the food. So he did that for a number of times. For multiple times, he will ring the bell and then present the meal, the food to the dog. He will ring the bell and present the food to the dog. The next time the dog is hungry, he will ring the bell and present the food to the dog, and the dog continues to salivate at each instance. After a while, the dog learned to salivate. Okay. Then Pavlov decided to withdraw the food and rang the bell alone to see if that sound of the bell could trigger the salivation response. And true to that, the dog salivated. So that means the dog has learned to salivate to the sound of the bell alone. First, the sound of the bell, which was a previously neutral stimulus. If you check the meanings of those abbreviations, you will see that the sound of the bell belongs to NS. It's abbreviated NS, that is neutral stimulus, something that cannot trigger any response. So, at this case, by sounding the bell and then the dog salivating, that means the sound of the bell has come to assume the role of a conditioned stimulus. That's why we call this conditioned stimulus, capable of eliciting the conditioned response by itself. The bell alone was now able to trigger the salivation response. So let's look at, there are 3 basic phases of the classical conditioning process. It involves there are 3 basic phases of this process. Let's consider them. In the first phase, that is before conditioning, I'm still trying to repeat what I said in the previous slide, but in more detail now, and then differentiating the phases. In the first phase, the food, which is the unconditioned stimulus, that is UCS. I wouldn't want us to waste time trying to call out the names and then the abbreviations. Please go to the second slide after the learning objectives and get used to them. In that way, you will understand the subsequent slides. The unconditioned stimulus is the food because it is a natural thing that can trigger a response. The unconditioned stimulus results in an unconditioned response. Presenting food naturally and automatically triggers a salivation response, yes. And this is the first stage of the classical conditioning process. That is the first stage. At this stage, there was no learning involved because naturally, if you give food to someone and that person is hungry, the person's mouth will start to water. You know, if the person will start salivating. It's natural. At this level, at this first phase, There is no learning involved. It's a natural occurrence, it's a reflex action. Let's get on to the phase 2. What happened at phase 2? During the second phase of the classical conditioning process, a sound of the bell was presented to the dog and it did not salivate. The sound of the bell is a neutral stimulus, NS, which is a stimulus that does not naturally elicit a response. But the neutral stimulus, that is the bell, the sound of the bell, is repeatedly paired with the food, the UCS. And as a result of this pairing, an association between NS and the UCS is formed. Yes, I'm going to be using the abbreviations henceforth. You know what is NS? So the dog was able to form an association between the ringing of the bell, that is the NS, and the food, which is the UCS. At this point, the once neutral stimulus becomes the conditioned stimulus. This is called the conditioning stage. Please, this is very important, this second phase, because that is where the conditioning stage occurs. That is where the conditioning occurs. Because the sound of the bell was able to assume the role of the conditioned stimulus, the role of the food, like a food, because it has been associated with the food. So what happened at the third stage? Once the association has been made between the UCS, what is UCS, the food, and the CS, the sound of the bell. In fact, the bell, the CS will come before the food. Once the association has been made between the CS and the UCS, presenting the CS alone, that is presenting the sound of the bell alone, now was able to trigger the response, the salivation response, even without food. Isn't it surprising? The bell alone, at this third phase, Pavlov decided to ring bell alone without presenting the food. And lo and behold, the dog salivated at the sound of the bell alone. So the resulting response is known as a conditioned response. At this stage, that response, that salivation that the dog salivated in the presence of the sound of the bell has now become the conditioned response. At this stage, learning has occurred. Learning has occurred now because the dog has learned to salivate at the sound of the bell. That means you can train anybody to respond to anything using this process, using, with everything, with all the conditions put in place, you can condition. That's where the concept of brainwashing came up. You can brainwash somebody. The dog has been brainwashed to respond to that sound of the bell. Okay, but then Pavlov went a little bit further. We have completed the phase 1, 2, and 3. But Pavlov, in his experiments, went a little bit further. He now was presenting the sound of the bell alone, without without giving food to the dog. And then the tendency of the dog to stop salivating, became obvious. The dog actually stopped salivating, extinction stage. That is what it is called, extinction. You are just ringing bell. You are not giving the food. The food in this experiment serves as a reinforcer. It's a reinforcement. It serves as a reinforcer. You are just giving sound of bell. Then the dog now refused to now salivate because there was no reinforcement to back up to reinforce the behavior of salivation. And then Pavlov also noticed that to make the dog recover from extinction, it must be presented with the food again. So that is that. I've explained the process of how classical conditioning works. And I'm sure, and I believe you'll be able to do that too. So let's look at the summary of what I've just been discussing in the preceding slides. This is just a summary of the whole discussion that I was just saying. When food is placed in a dog's mouth, salivation takes place and is a reflex action. No learning is involved in this first instance. Then Pavlov paired the sound of the bell and food to the dog, and the dog salivated. He did it several times, multiple times. Then the third instance, the third phase, Pavlov then withdrew the food and presented the sound of the bell alone. The dog salivated. At this stage, learning has occurred. At the second stage, conditioning was achieved. That's a conditioning stage. The dog has been brainwashed, has been conditioned to respond to the sound of the bell alone. And then extinction stage occurs when the sound of bell is no longer accompanied with the food. To make the dog recover from extinction, it must be presented with food again. I leave a question here I want us to discuss during the live class that is coming up on Friday. At what stage was conditioning completed? And at what stage did extinction set in? We shall discuss this and some other areas when we meet on Friday. So important points to note. For conditioning to take place, several factors are necessary. Duration of time. Mind you, Pavlov did not just present the ringing of the bell and waited for several hours before giving food. They go hand in hand. There was no time lag between both stimuli, the sound of the bell and the presentation of the food. No time lag. It's almost immediately. You present the bell and you give the food. That's when the dog will appreciate the association. That's when that brainwashing, the conditioning can take effect. But if there is a delay between the two periods, they might not have the result in condition. Then another factor that should be noted is that the dog must be hungry. The dog must be hungry. And then repetition. There must be repeated hearing of the bell, the sound of the bell, and the food repeatedly. The Pavlov didn't just do it at once, at only one instance. He did it several times so that the dog can get used to the association between the sound of the bell and the food. That's when the conditioning can take effect. That's when it will result into conditioning. Otherwise, so again, when we meet in class on Friday, we will see how some of these factors can also be replicated in the classroom situation, because we are going to cover up another important theory, the Skinner's one. Let's continue. What are the educational implications of Pavlov's classical conditioning theory? Yeah, classical conditioning primarily influences emotional behavior. What it is saying is that things that make us happy, sad, angry, fear, that cause us fear, they become associated with neutral stimuli that gain our attention. For example, if a teacher beats any child excessively, then that child will begin to fear that teacher. Even the mention of the teacher's name can evoke fear in the child. I remember in my secondary school days, there was this particular teacher that we used to fear a lot. That teacher used to beat us a lot those days. To the extent that the mere mention of that teacher's name will send us away, will send us hiding. Even some of us dreaded his class. To the extent the subject that she, the woman that she used to teach, we did not like that subject. So we only attend the class because if you don't, you're going to receive several lashes of the thing. So the same way. So you can see just caning a student, caning them excessively, how it can trigger the fear response in the student. And this fear response can be associated. It can even be, yes, it can be associated with other things in this situation. It can be associated with taking tests. It can be associated with even going to school. That's where some students come to hate school. So the second point, fear, love, hatred towards specific subjects are created through conditioning. Yes, you see some students not liking some subjects, some specific subjects. Why? Because of the experiences they have and because of the conditioning process that they've been subjected to in that particular class or lesson. So that's a wake-up call for us teachers to be mindful of our behavior in the classroom. Third point, classical conditioning can be used for developing a favorable attitude to subjects. Teachers to subject, teachers and schools. Teachers can apply classical conditioning in the class by creating a positive classroom environment to help students overcome fear or anxiety. Just as students can take a particular subject, because of the way the teacher handles that subject, the same way teachers should improve in their behavior and try to apply classical conditioning in the class by creating a positive classroom environment that will attract students to come to school and to learn. Then principles of classical conditioning are very helpful in developing good habits in children. Such habits as cleanliness, punctuality, and respect for others can be created through the process of classical conditioning. Bad habits can also be eliminated through conditioning. Again, some school subjects are learned more adequately through the process of conditioning. For instance, reading, writing, spelling, and mathematics, especially the multiplication table, are learned more effectively through the process of classical conditioning. Try to attempt this class activity. In classical conditioning theory, how does a neutral stimulus become a conditioned stimulus? Fill in the missing words. So attempt the number 2 activity there. Fill in the missing words. Is about the applications mostly. So with that, let's get on to the second section of this lesson, which is on the Skinner's theory of operant conditioning. Operant conditioning, another name for operant conditioning is instrumental conditioning. Operant conditioning emphasizes reinforcement for behavior. You will learn the principles of the theory. You will learn the forms of reinforcement and punishment. You will learn the schedules of reinforcement and the classroom implications of the theory. What is operant conditioning theory? Operant conditioning theory of learning was formulated by Skinner, who was an American psychologist. That of Pavlov, I think Russian psychologist, yes. Skinner was an American psychologist. The basic premise of the theory was that behaviors are strengthened or weakened according to their consequences. That is, their future probability of occurrence is either increased or decreased by the immediate presence of a reward or punishment. Skinner believed that behavior is an outcome of response that follows the action. The learner will possibly repeat the action of a particular behavior if it is followed with a pleasant consequence. Of course, if you do something and somebody gives you a reward for it, you want to repeat that action. It's what we do all the time. So Skinner's theories, all the theories are very relevant to the classroom situation, including Skinner's one that we are treating right now. All of them are very relevant to us. They are relevant to our homes, to our classrooms, to our environment. to how we deal to our relationship with people. Skinner is mostly concerned with the response, how we respond, how we carry out, how we do things, how the behavior you put up at every point in time can be repeated or not repeated based on the consequences of that behavior. That is what we're talking about. His theory is built on the concept of reinforcement and punishment. We shall take a look at the two concepts in more detail, this reinforcement and punishment, because that is the triple upon which Skinner's theory is based. Reinforcement, especially the use of positive reinforcement. He does not believe in the use of corporal punishment. The punishment he means here is a different, let's go on. Let me not. Still have the secret here. Let's go on so you enjoy the lesson. Forms of reinforcement. Like I said, Skinner's theory is based on the concept of reinforcement. So, and punishment. We're going to look at the two concepts in more detail. First, reinforcement, forms of reinforcement. There are two forms of reinforcement: positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. Okay, so yeah. Positive reinforcement involves adding something pleasant, or positive in order to increase a behavior. For instance, a child does something good and you reward the child. You praise the child. Praise is a form of reward. You reinforce the child. We are saying the same thing. Reward the child, reinforce the child. These are concepts in this theory. A child does something, you smile at the child. Smile is also a form of reinforcement. A child does something good, you praise the child. A child does something good, you give the child a thumbs up. A child does something good, you give a nod of approval to the child. A child does something good, you smile at the child. All these incentives, they are all forms of reinforcement. Smiling at somebody who has done something or who has given a correct response, praising, and all of those. So they are all forms of positive reinforcement. What about negative reinforcement? It is in negative reinforcement, an undesirable stimulus is avoided or removed to increase the desired behavior. Here, you engage in an action in order to avoid a negative result. Let me give an example. If, for instance, there is you have a rule in the class that if any student does not complete his or her assignment, that student will pay money or pay some amount, will drop some amount for the use of the class. I'm not saying you should encourage that, but I'm just using that as an example. So, in order not to pay that amount, the student will want to complete the assignment. You will complete your assignment to avoid paying the 200 naira. If it is 200 naira, that is the tax. You want to avoid paying it, you will complete your homework to avoid paying that. Remember, we said in negative reinforcement, an undesirable stimulus is avoided or removed. In this case, the 200 naira is the undesirable stimulus. It is avoided or removed in order to increase the desired behavior. And the desired behavior we are increasing is that of completing their homework, completion of homework. So I will also want to encourage you students, please read your lesson notes. All of these examples have been indicated in details, in more details in that lesson note. It's also uploaded on your course page. Please read it, take time to read it because the time allowed for this lesson video might not cover everything that you need to know about this topic. So take time out to read your lesson notes. There are other several examples I've provided in that lesson note. It will be good for you to read them. Okay. Another example of negative reinforcement is if I tell you students that if you attend class, if you attend your live class for the 8 times, the 8 facilitation time, you wouldn't then you wouldn't have to take your exams. For instance, exams. You know, exams is something that people are want to avoid. It's just because it's something that is needed to do to earn some credit for you for your degree, to earn your degree. Otherwise, most people will be avoiding it. So in this case, if I say, if you complete your attendance, if you do have your attendance each week, you wouldn't do exam. Everybody will want to rush and do that, attend the class to avoid taking the exam, the end of semester exam. So that is a kind of example of negative reinforcement. And I want you to know that the use of the word positive or negative in this sense do not mean good or bad. Instead, positive means you are adding something, and negative means you are taking away something. Actually, in a way, you can use a very, there is a way a teacher can use negative reinforcement as a form of punishment. Not punishment. It can serve as a role, it can play the role of reward. There is a way a very skillful teacher can use negative reinforcement and it will now play the role of a reward. It will play the role of a reward, yes. So in a way, the use of positive and negative do not mean good or bad. It means for positive, you are adding something. You are adding praise. Somebody does something good, you praise. You are adding something. For the negative, you are removing. You are removing something that will seem like an unpleasant stimulus so that the child can do something positive to increase the desired behavior of a child or of a student. Yeah, so negative in that sense means you are taking something away. Let's continue. Forms of punishment, like reinforcement, we said it comes in 2 forms. Also, punishment comes in 2 forms, positive punishment and negative punishment. In positive punishment, you add an undesirable stimulus to decrease or stop a behavior. E.g., spanking a student to get the student to stop testing in class. That spanking is a positive punishment. In this case, an unpleasant stimulus, that is the spanking, is added in order to decrease a behavior, a bad behavior. That is the testing in class. However, students, you take note, this notion has been revised on the assumption that positive punishment, or in a more familiar word, we call it corporal punishment. That is the one Skinner referred to it as positive punishment because you are adding something undesirable. You are adding something undesirable to stop a behavior, to stop a bad behavior. But in a more familiar term, I want to call it corporal punishment because you are adding. When you beat a student, you are adding. When you slap a student, you are adding. No, the intended desire is for that student to stop the behavior. The intention of the teacher in slapping or beating or doing any form of punishment is for the student to stop that bad behavior. But it has been discovered that corporal punishment has a lot of problems. We shall still come to that. Hang it up there. So let's go on to the negative punishment. I will continue from where I stopped on the notion of positive punishment. Well, in negative punishment, you remove a pleasant stimulus to decrease or stop the undesirable behavior. For instance, if a student or if your child does something bad at home or in school, and that child has a favorite toy that the child loves so much, you can remove that toy. You can take away that toy. Look at it. In negative punishment, you remove a pleasant stimulus. The pleasant stimulus there is that toy. That toy, in order to stop the undesirable behavior, in order to stop the bad behavior. Probably that child did something wrong. You remove the toy. You check it out. After some time, then you see that the child will want to, because the child wouldn't want to part with that toy. The child will change, will behave well in order to get the toy back. So for negative punishment, make sure that you are removing something that child loves. Remember, you said you remove a pleasant stimulus. So whatever you are removing must be something that is pleasant to that child. If it is not pleasant, the child will leave that thing for you. You wouldn't care, wouldn't mind. You wouldn't mind forfeiting that particular thing. But if it is something that the child likes, you want to behave well in order to have it. For instance, again, which teachers can use in the class instead of beating, slapping, knocking on the head, which is the positive punishment. You can actually, maybe a child does something bad in the class. During recess, you can keep the child in the class while others are out on break. For instance, the child likes to play football during the break time. You will find out that even after 2 days or so, it wouldn't even get up to 2 days. That child will want to behave well again. Because the child wouldn't want to forfeit the playing of football during the only opportunity he has in school, which is during the recess, during the break time. We parents or teachers can actually use this a lot instead of subjecting children to corporal punishment and enduring and causing injury with them. So we can actually adopt this form of negative reinforcement. Negative reinforcement, there is nothing physical that is involved, no physical pain, no psychological pain. You are removing something that the child loves. If it is time, maybe there is a particular time the child is allowed to watch television or is allowed to do something in school, you take away that time, remove that time, let the child be occupied with something else. Within that, you will see that the child will change. If it is that particular time of watching that program, if it's something that the child cherishes. Okay, yeah. So an example here is when the child misbehaves, a parent can take away the child's favorite toy for 1 week. Please give a time tag for it. Please don't just do it indefinitely. You are punishing that it becomes something else. You can take away that thing the child likes for maybe 1 week, 2 weeks. And then along the line, if the child starts behaving well, please return the toy or return whatever you have removed, thereby reinforcing the changed behavior. Yeah, don't make it too long. Can give it a week. I'm sure before the 1 week elapses, that child will want to behave well again, and then you release whatever it is you have seized from the child. Just release it so that it can reinforce the change behavior, so that the child will have trust in you. So refer to the notes again for more examples that have been indicated. Now let's combine these 4 terms. Let's combine them together and see on this table. So all we have been talking about, the positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, negative punishment, are all encased in this table here. So take your time to really look at it. You have positive reinforcement. Something pleasant is added to increase the likelihood of the desired behavior. Take your time and then look at it. All we have been describing is summarized in this table. Okay, so like I said, the one I told you to hang on onto something, that is the positive punishment aspect. I said it's in a more familiar term, we call it corporal punishment. Corporal punishment is a common practice in many Nigerian classrooms and even in homes. And examples of corporal punishment include hitting a child, slapping, knocking a child's head, asking children to kneel down on hard surfaces, threatening to beat but did not. Yes, it's classified as part of this. Threatening to beat but you did not, even if you did not, the threat you give that child is also grouped as a form of corporal punishment. Yelling, verbal abuse, ridicule, name calling, you are idiot, you are this, you are a dog, you are this, you don't know anything. These are all forms of corporal punishment. And there are many problems. Research has shown that there are many problems associated with the use of corporal punishment. And corporal punishment has been shown not to result in the desired outcome of improved behavior. And they even result in the escalation of unwanted behavior. It hardens the child. We're still going to look at it. There's a particular slide where I have listed out some of the consequences of corporal punishment that resulted from research studies, from many years of research studies. The only positive outcome of corporal punishment is that it leads to immediate compliance. Immediate, so that's all. Immediate in the sense that if you are beating a child, the child will only comply because you are beating that child at that moment. That's why they say it leads to immediate compliance. Although temporarily, it's just temporary. That compliance is temporary, it's not prolonged, it's just temporary. The punished behavior is never eliminated, it is suppressed. It is suppressed. Corporal punishment only suppresses it, it doesn't eliminate it. So teachers, please take note of that. So Skinner argued that corporal punishment is a very bad technique for controlling behavior. He advocated for the frequent use of corporal positive reinforcement. And he believed that positive reinforcement was more effective than corporal punishment when trying to change behavior or when trying to establish behavior. Given all these scenarios, it is therefore important to be aware of some of the consequences in using corporal punishment on children. And several researches have shown that they are ineffective. They are an ineffective method of discipline and have major harmful consequences on children and students. And these are some of the consequences. Corporal punishment will cause children to become more aggressive and prone to antisocial behavior and delinquency. They learn to use physical violence to bully and control people. Please, these are not my words. They are the result of many decades of research. They are the result of many decades of research. I didn't find them. They are what, and it has been proven. I'm sure you have people you have punished. There is that strange relationship between you and them, between you and such students. You know, punishment hardens children. It doesn't, it escalates the whatever unwanted behavior you are trying to correct. Corporal punishment leads to lying. You beat children, so the children will start lying, giving you lies. They learn it because they are afraid of you. Children learn to tell lies in order to avoid punishment. Yes, nobody wants to be beaten. Nobody wants pain on the body. So they start, it leads them to tell lies. Corporal punishment hardens the child instead of correcting them. I've said that. Corporal punishment does not guide the child towards the desired behavior, right? Corporal punishment causes fear, causes anxiety, causes withdrawal syndrome and timidity. Children who are punished by teachers may come to fear the teacher and try to avoid school. Corporal punishment has a negative impact on children's cognitive development. That has been proven. It interferes with learning, yes. Punishing a child because he or she performed poorly in a test or exam is totally wrong. Many of us teachers will do it a lot. You are destroying that child's cognitive development. Corporal punishment causes physical injury, emotional injury, as well as mental health problems. For these reasons, it should be used sparingly, very less in classroom settings or in home, or if not at all. Don't use at all if possible. You have negative, you can use other techniques. Positive reinforcement. You can also use it to change behavior. In fact, there is a particular module unit. When we get there, you will see how the use of positive reinforcement can be used to change a bad behavior. Only positive reinforcement. It can't be used to change a bad behavior. You also have negative, like I said, the use of negative reinforcement. Negative there doesn't mean bad. It means you are removing something. It can also be used. Then if you are a skillful teacher, it will serve the role of a reward. You use it well. Even negative punishment. And also you can adopt that. Negative punishment. Not positive. Positive is the one you are adding. You are beating. You are abusing the child. You are adding. You are insulting the child. You know, that's the one that is positive punishment, which we, in our familiar words, we say corporal punishment. So let's go on. Yes, we're almost coming to the end of the lesson. Yeah, we have said before that Skinner's theory focuses on a system of reinforcement. He believes so much in the use of positive reinforcement to change a behavior or to reinforce a behavior. And we also remember, we said the best way to teach or modify a behavior is to use positive reinforcement. Skinner came up with the idea of reinforcement schedule. What is a reinforcement schedule? It is a rule that specifies when and how often a desired behavior will be used. A reinforcement schedule is divided into two broad categories: continuous schedules and intermittent or partial schedules. Continuous, just as the word suggests, in this type of reinforcement, every correct response is rewarded, is reinforced. A child answers a question, you ask a question, the child answers, oh, good, you praise the child. The child answers again, good, you praise the child. John does something in your home, oh, good, John, for laying your bed. You praise the child at every time that John does that thing. What about partial or intermittent reinforcement? This type of reinforcement, sometimes you withhold reinforcement and sometimes you provide reinforcement. That's why it's called intermittent or partial. Only some of the correct responses are reinforced, not all of them. And then in partial reinforcement, there are 4 types of partial reinforcement schedules based on the time and number of reinforcements. They are based on the time. Some are based on time, some are based on number of responses. The four types of intermittent schedules are fixed ratio reinforcement schedule. Fixed, just as the word suggests, fixed. Fixed ratio. Ratio has to do with number of responses. This is an arrangement of providing reinforcement after a set fixed number of responses have occurred. E.g., a student may be rewarded for every 5 mathematical problems solved. Every 5. John does something after every 5 of that thing that is done, or every 3 times after doing that thing. After the third attempt, you reinforce. After the third attempt, you reinforce. After the third attempt that child has done that thing, you reinforce. That's the fixed ratio reinforcement schedule. Then variable ratio, variable, it varies. You see their names? It varies. And this is an arrangement of providing reinforcement after a varying number of responses has been made. Here, the number of responses needed to gain the reinforcement is not consistent, just like the first one. The student may be rewarded after maybe 3rd attempt, or 5th attempt, or 10 attempts. It's not consistent, it's irregular. Okay, then fixed interval. Interval has to do with time, the time, an amount of time. Fixed interval reinforcement schedule. This is when a behavior is reinforced at a set amount of time. You praise your child after every 5 minutes. After every 5 minutes, you praise your student. So for variable interval reinforcement schedule, reinforcement is provided at a varying amount of time from the previous reinforcement. You praise your student after varying periods of time have passed, maybe 3 minutes, or 10 minutes, or 15 minutes. So, what are the educational implications of Skinner's theory? So, please go through. They are easy to understand. It just shows that teachers should be enforced to use more of. I've been repeating some of these things in the course of the discussion. Teachers should reinforce student behavior using positive reinforcement a lot. You can use a smile, praise, verbal praise, social recognition, a pat on the back, prize, or by giving marks. These are different ways you can give positive reinforcement. So please look through the other ones. So I leave you with the class activity. Identify 2 shortcomings in our educational system, which Skinner's theory can help to correct. So, so we have looked at the meaning of theories of learning. We have considered the two major groups of learning theories, the behaviorist learning theories and cognitive learning theories. And we also, in this lesson, we consider 2 of the behaviorist theories, that is Pavlov's theory of classical conditioning and Skinner's theory of operant conditioning. I'm summarizing now. And then we went on to look at the principles of each of those theories and their educational implications of those theories. I hope you did enjoy the lesson, the discussion of this lesson. Until I come your way again, it's goodbye from me. Thank you.